Man, oh man, have I been gushing on Castlevania ever since I started this channel. I mean, it does so much right, from characters, to music, to gameplay, to atmosphere, to bosses. It's almost as though the series can do no wrong. I can't even say that with a straight face. Yep, like any series, Castlevania is far from perfect. For example, you remember those boss battles I mentioned? Yeah, well, it does have some awesome bosses, believe me, I covered those before. The series also has its fair share of bosses that absolutely suck. So now instead of gushing on the ones I love, I'm gonna vent on the ones that just make me want to send them back to hell where they belong. Once again, one boss per game, and if you have a difference of opinion, please don't be a bitch, okay? Alright, time to sharpen your oak stakes. It's game time! As I've said before, there are two major types of bosses that really tick me off. Those that are difficult due to unfair bullshit, and those that are insultingly easy while not providing any sense of fun. Acmodown II from Super Castlevania 4 is an example of the latter. Being the boss of the second to last stage in the game, I expected a bit more of a challenge. What I got instead was a boss that was predictable, easy, and tedious. It's a mummy, yeah, so it doesn't have much in the way of brains, but I wasn't expecting things to be this easy. You can pretty much waggle your whip in its general direction, and more often than not, its attacks won't hit you, and you'll be able to damage it little by little until you win. That's it. Its attacks are dispelled with a single flick of the whip, and your range should be good enough that you can attack it while fending off its fireballs. A boss like this does not belong this late in the game, especially when you've dealt with bosses like the Dancing Spectres and the Zap Bat in previous stages. At least the stage that follows is a genuine challenge. This boss, on the other hand, should have stayed in Egypt. Hang with a 10 maybe, play some duel monsters. Where Chaos from Aria of Sorrow got it right, the Undead Parasite from Lament of Innocence got it completely wrong. Don't bother checking your insurance cards because Obamacare don't cover lame bosses like this. Basically, first thing you gotta do is whip the eyes in the holes in the floor while this giant worm thing is moving in and out of the holes in the wall, and will sometimes spout fire. Meanwhile, Solus are spawning all over the place, causing you to divert your attention even further. Simple enough, right? Well, the actual health bar doesn't appear until after the eyes are gone. Now you have to deal with the actual parasite, and by deal with, I mean wait for it to pop its head out of one of the holes in the room. And you're still dealing with the worm and the infinitely spawning minions. You see my problem with this boss? It's poorly designed, poorly executed, and downright tedious. I came to this castle to save my girl and kick vampire butt, not play fucking whack-a-mole. I'm over 30 years old and this ain't Chuck E. Cheese. Just let me get this fight over with and let me pick up my tickets, damn it. Let's talk about a game that often gets overlooked. Castlevania Chronicles on the PS1. I wish I could talk about this game on a more positive list, really I do. It may not be the best reimagining of Simon's adventure into Chez Dracula, believe me, that's coming later, but it did manage to get a few things right. The Clock Tower stage, however, was not one of them. It had some frustrating obstacles, some cheap enemy placement, and a boss that annoyed the crap out of me. Meet the big bad wolf's mother-in-law, ladies and gentlemen. This SheWolf was a huge pain in the ass for me. All it does is jump around and throw rocks at you. Simple on paper, but that argument is just as flimsy as the paper it's written on, so don't expect it to hold up in court, Phoenix. This thing hops around so quickly and so erratically that one false move and it'll move to someplace where you can't get out of the way in time. And if you die, it's right back to the bottom of the section. You'll want to reach this boss at full health, but unless your skills are almost godlike, that's not likely to happen. That's why I have yet to even beat this crazy bitch. And I'm using the actual definition of bitch, not the one that sends Miss Andreth into a frenzy. Dracula's Curse was a hard game, and I mean real hard, like what you'd expect for NES hard. Unfortunately, some of that difficulty came in cheap ways, like you getting stuck on the stairs at the wrong time, auto-scrolling sections that could leave you unprepared for an enemy to literally appear out of nowhere, and a boss that I could only beat by being cheap. The concept behind the Doppelganger is simple enough. Whatever form you take, it takes that form as well. The problem is that it hounds your ass constantly, giving you little chance to attack, and if he pins you in a corner, you're pretty much fucked. Making matters worse is that by this point, you die in 4 hits, while the Doppelganger takes 16 before kicking the bucket. Oh, and when you're playing as Trevor, the clone always has the cross, regardless of which sub-weapon you have. You want to know how I was able to beat this guy? By taking advantage of the window you have when he changes form after you do the same. Even the Dark Link battle in Zelda 2 was more fair than this. I'm sorry, but if the only way I could beat a boss is by out-cheaping it, we have a problem. I may not make a lot of money from these videos, but I don't like being that cheap. It just makes me feel dirty. I'm gonna need a shower after this. Oh dear, now I gotta talk about Harmony of Dissonance. If that reaction wasn't enough of a hint, I don't like this game. The combination of spell elements was done better in Circle of the Moon, the 2 castle gimmick was done better in Symphony of the Night, and bosses and music were done better in most of the other games in the series. Which leads to the next boss on this shit list, Max Slimer. I really don't have any fancy words to describe this boss. It's just a giant slime. A giant slime that shrinks and spawns smaller slimes whenever you attack it. It just glomps toward you, slows you think, while it just takes your hits and spawns more slimes. Doesn't this sound familiar? Well, it should, because Salvo Slime and Yoshi's Island did the same thing, only better. In a Castlevania game, you expect bosses to be better. A boss like this, it's not creative, it's not fun, it's just lazy and boring. Like a lot of the bosses in Harmony of Dissonance. The other GBA Vanias are more worth your time, to be honest. And that shower honestly can't come soon enough. You know what? I'll be right back. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. Oh yeah. Ah, yeah, that's much better. Oh no, not this boss. You'd think a suit of armor with no head at all is no threat, even if it is from Celtic mythology, but Dullahan is a pain no matter where you fight him, and he's at his absolute worst in Curse of Darkness. Man, talk about annoying. First thing he does is jump in the air to create a shockwave that requires pinpoint timing to avoid major damage. He can also create a vortex of active plasma that does the same thing and curses you. Not enough suck for ya? He has combos that include unblockable attacks, not to mention his powerful charge attack and that beam of his. But those on their own aren't what make this boss a pain. It's this high because he's a pain for completionists like I was at the time. You see, he possesses an item needed to make the strongest single-hand sword in the game. In order to get that item, you need to steal it. Problem is, the steal window is ridiculously short. It only opens for a moment when he's about to jump, and unless you're perfect on the timing, the end result will be you on your ass taking a fuckload of damage. And don't count on the invincibility pod either. That wears off in almost no time at all. And what's your reward for beating this thing? Dracula's castle gets raised from its ruins, and Isaac stabs Trevor in the back and nearly kills him. You fool! So, Dimitri. This guy copies the power of monsters that attack him. Makes for a potentially easy fight. After which, Soma absorbs the jerkwad's soul. Somehow. Flash forward to major spoilers. So Arikado helped Soma break through Celia's deception. Yeah, Doppelganger of Soma's girlfriend. Nice try. Succubus tried the same thing and it didn't work either. When said jerkwad pops into the Doppelganger's body. Somehow. Looks like the old broad doesn't need Soma anymore, but Soma ain't having any of it. So he tracks the bad guys into the most disturbing of places and hello! Looks like jerkwad made old broad into a sacrifice. Okay, you son of a bitch, we're gonna go! What is this thing and why? Seriously, Dawn of Sorrow, you were on the right track building up the rematch with Dimitri, and you give us this instead? And worse still, the ironically named menace is way too easy for a final boss. All of its attacks are easy to avoid and are too well telegraphed in both of its phases. Not only that, but what are these things that come out of it? They look like some twisted anatomy. But the worst part about this boss? It comes completely out of nowhere, is completely over the top even for the series, and once it's defeated, no one ever mentions it again.
Being a little delicate moment.
I'm not apologizing. Castle mode is Judgment's equivalent to a challenge mode in many other fighting games. You go through matches, some of which have special conditions, as you progress through the mode. Some of these can be easy, while others not so much. So I'm gonna spare you some brain cells here and tell you that, of course, Dracula's waiting for you at the end. And he sucks. Let me lay out the conditions for this fight. For starters, Dracula gets a 30% attack buff, meaning all those attacks he spams do even more damage than usual. What's more, Dracula's health regenerates constantly throughout the fight. You all know how much I hate self-healing bosses. If you follow my streams, you know that's one thing I hate about that monster and elven guise. And then there's the thing that people hate about Dracula as a boss in this game to begin with. He's cheap as fuck. He's got super armor, and when you do get a combo on him, it ain't long before he just batifies and teleports halfway across the room. And of course, when he suffers no knockback from attacks, that means he can just spam his attacks with no remorse. He's powerful enough in the game as it is. Why make him worse? He's still nowhere near the worst fighting game boss out there, but that's no excuse. Hello, Scottsdale Police? I've got a situation with a vampire in New York City. What do you mean you don't deal with vampires? The first couple bosses of Order of Ecclesia aren't really that bad. They're not anything to write home about, but not terrible. Then we get to the lighthouse, where we find number 2 on our list, the literal giant enemy crab Brachyura. Now this isn't so much a difficulty spike as it is an exercise in utter tedium. It starts with you running from this thing until you literally hit the ceiling. Then you have to attack it while avoiding its easy-to-dodge claw and acid bubbles. Once you do enough damage, it becomes steamed crab, and now you have to trick it into breaking the ceiling. Do this 2 more times, each time giving you less footing and having you rely more on your Magnus Cliff. In fact, the last phase of the fight pretty much restricts you to the left side of the screen. Like I said, this boss fight isn't necessarily hard, but it is repetitive and boring, and that's one of the worst things you can do in a boss fight. Make it boring. It certainly doesn't help that this boss is always below you, but if you don't have a glyph with any vertical range by this point, I don't really know how to help your sorry ass. But I will give this fight one thing. The finisher is so satisfying as you drop a spiked elevator car on this thing. Just don't bother to cook it. Food poisoning for days. Okay, while my stomach's settling down, here are some dishonorable mentions. The giant eyeball from Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth, a joke even by first boss standards. Astarte from Portrait of Ruin, mainly for making Jonathan useless. The fight with Shaft from Symphony of the Night for being such a huge step down from Rondo of Blood. And pretty much every boss in Castlevania The Adventure. Okay, this may seem like a cop-out, and it probably is, but the worst boss in the history of Castlevania is the CEO of Konami, Hideki Hayakawa. Or at least, that's what I want to say, but my list is restricted to the bosses in the games themselves. So yeah, Simon's Quest. I won't go out and claim that it's the best Castlevania game out there, but at least it did a few things right. The bosses, however, sucked. Yeah, all 3 of them. Death can be skipped outright and barely does anything except slowly chase you and throw easy-to-counter scythes. Vampira is necessary to get an essential item in the game, but regardless is beaten easily as long as you possess Dracula's rib and the shield that comes with it. By the way, nice job on that, you hack of a spell checker! Then there's Dracula himself. If you spam the Golden Knife, Sacred Flame, Holy Water, Diamond, or Flame Whip, you can beat him without breaking a sweat because he pauses every time he gets hit so you can strike him again. In determining which one was the worst, it came down to which one was the most tedious. So then, it's official. The number 1 worst Castlevania boss of all time is the battle with Dracula in Simon's Quest. You'd expect more of a battle from the King of Vampires, the Lord of Darkness, the goddamn Bathead himself! But no, just channel your inner British comedian and spam, spam, spam! Now I know I put another Dracula battle on the list, but in judgment he's hard. Like you'd expect. But here, he's disappointment incarnate. Let me put this in perspective for you. Simon's Quest takes place 7 years after the original Castlevania and its remakes. Symphony of the Night takes place only 5 years after Rondo of Blood. And Dracula was harder in that game unless you had a game-breaking item. Wouldn't logic dictate that rest would make all the Romanian bat brains stronger? Do corpses even suffer from insomnia? I rest my case. I'm the Quarter Guy, and I hope you're all game for one more list. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like. If you have something to say, leave your comments below. I really appreciate them. If you want to see more, click the annotations for my playlists, and click that little subscribe button down there. I'm also on social media, and if you have some extra money and want to support the channel, you can donate to my Patreon. Trust me, I'll make it worth your while. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.